One night, Hubbard said, bring out a bottle of bourbon or maybe two, and we'll sit down and we'll write the axioms of Dianetics. And Hubbard said, it's got to sound science-y.
Yes, exactly.
Have you ever met a Scientologist who actually read those bloody things? Hi, Chris.
Now, we have had books on our mind recently, you and I.
Mhm.
I have had a bit of a production spurt, you could say, recently, and I've been pounding through the chapters of my book on cult recovery, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But you have just hit publish on your book in the last few, what was it, about a month ago or a few weeks
We
ago?
we started on Kindle about 5 weeks ago. We had the print book up in its second edition already last week, and 2 days ago the audio book went up, all on Amazon. Yeah.
Awesome. Audiobook is out there. So this is the book John wrote called If Scientology Ruled the World. It's got space aliens, it's got Nazis, it's got Scientology, I mean, there's a lot in there. And
The only thing that the only thing that isn't in there is Indiana Jones.
there you go. That's right. But the spirit of Indiana Jones actually pervades. I mean, it is such a takedown of Nazi ideology and nonsense in a deep way. Like it's interesting how the myths and legends of our times and cultures are based in these true, weird, odd things. You
Mhm.
take something like Indiana Jones, who has been my lifelong hero, quite honestly, since I was 10 years old.
Oh, it's all
And
coming out now.
oh boy, I'll tell you. And you take a theme or an idea, fighting Nazis and Hitler running around, archaeological digs, looking for supernatural power. And you think, well, that's a fantasy story. That's funny. That's pulp. And then you find out the truth, and it's way stranger than the fiction could ever be. And you find out that you're plumbing the depths of like spiritualism, and you're bringing in Blavatsky, and you're bringing in centuries old thinking about humanity and its origin story and these different races that were thought to exist at one time that
Mhm.
that manifested here on earth, the idea of beings of light and energy and water and all of this just incredibly fantastical storytelling that people have engaged in over the centuries. But then you get this woman who decides to put it all into these like tomes of knowledge, this Madame Blavatsky woman. And suddenly there's this kind of spiritual nexus that happens. And from that comes or springs Nazi ideology, the Ordo Templi Orientis, the Aleister Crowley themes, and from this comes a young L. Ron Hubbard diving into this world and trying to answer why does he have voices in his head, and what is this woman he's seen all the time giving him advice, and just this crazy mix of ingredients. And here we end up, 100 years later, talking about Scientology coming out of all of this crap. You couldn't make it up. It's absolutely astounding. And yet you took the time to document everything I just said and so much more into this book. How has it been being received, and what's been some of the feedback you've been getting?
I'm amazed at the feedback, and thank you very much for the review you posted to Amazon. Um, it Two of the people, I'm sending it out to friends along the way, and a couple of people have emailed me already say, look, I haven't finished it yet, but incredible. This. So I'm saying, well, wait till you get to the end. You might be disappointed. But just, yeah, how beliefs influence behavior, how it is that we're going to be talking about your model, and one of the aspects of your model is morality.
Yes.
And morality is pretty much figured in the mores, in the customs of a group. And we grow up with a certain morality. There are things you do and you don't do.
Yeah.
In our lifetimes, we've seen a shift in the view of homosexuality, for example.
That's
And
right.
the thought that somebody like Alan Turing, one of the great innovators of computing, killed himself, having been convicted of a homosexual act and chemically castrated. The thought of what he's now, there's a representation of him on our money in this country, on one of our banknotes. He, the Turing test, all of this stuff, the cracking of the Enigma codes during World War II. So the Allies knew what the Germans were instructing their people to do. This was an incredible, significant contribution. Yet because he was gay, he was destroyed. And there are periods in history where this happened. Now that's a kind of morality. That's a kind of, well, that's wrong. You're not meant to do that. And of course we're seeing the resurgence of that even as we speak.
That's right.
And so much else, the idea of racial inferiority, which actually you can date. This is an amazing thing. It's not in the book. It's one of the other things that fascinated me. In 1676, Bacon's Rebellion, black slaves got together in the US with white indentured servants who were pretty much slaves but had a limit where their indenture would be up and they would be released. Most of them died along the way.
That's
They
right.
get together and for months they fight a rebellion. And this causes this shift in attitudes whereby up until this point historically, and I read a great deal about this, I was really fascinated by it, up until this point, racism barely existed. The idea of skin color was irrelevant. If you think about the Roman Empire, there's no relevance. You are a Roman if you're in the empire. Many of the emperors came from the extremes of the empire. They could be Asian in origin. They even had an English one, a Briton. But then we get this idea of separation, which comes about largely because slaves are converting to Christianity. And before that point, it was possible to consider them inferior because they were heathens, infidels. Now you had to think of something else because the Quakers and other people were going along converting. Having said that, of course, the Quakers helped the slave trade. They're, not necessarily getting away with anything here. But so there had to be this change. And now it's just natural that you have communities that believe that somebody who is brown is in some way inferior. And
That's right.
the realistic truth, and genetically this has now been absolutely proven, is we're all descended from black people. So it's just we're a bit paler.
Sorry. It's truth.
And that does come into my book because I talk about eugenics and the problem that this is this pseudoscience, which has fallen apart completely. And yet there are still people who believe it. There are still people who are pushing for racial separation.
That's right.
Both black
It's a
and white people.
it is the strangest artificial construct we have to hate each other, that we will divide on this artificial construct of race. There is no such thing. And because we have, physical differences and similarities by groupings of geographical regions, we invent this concept of racial differences, right? The Mongoloid versus the Anglo, versus the this and that.
Mediterraneanoid.
Oh my God, we're all, and these various pseudo-scientific terminology, and you bring, social Darwinism and eugenics into this, and it's a recipe for disaster because it's all built on the core belief that we are fundamentally different from one another in key fundamental difference, in ways which are it's just not true. It's a false assumption.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, and I've not seen it written anywhere else. I do come to do my book that we don't want to think about Nazi science. Of course we don't. The horrible experiments in Dachau and Buchenwald. We don't want to think about it. And that's totally understandable. But there is an aspect of Nazi science that I think we should think about. They spent 12 years trying to prove that there was such a thing as the Aryan race.
And that's one of the things I learned from reading your book that I was so fascinated by.
And they absolutely disproved it. There's one
Yeah.
study where they found that 11% of the Jews they were studying had blonde hair and blue eyes.
Oops.
And in the end they had no measures. They did skull measures, they did calf muscle measures, blood groups, fingerprints, ears. They tried all of these things, and in the end what you find out is there's more variation within a group than between groups.
Wow.
So it
Wow.
it was an absolute nonsense. And I think by the end there's this bizarre statement from Hitler, which again I've only seen it in one place. One German historian brings it up, that in the bunker in the last days, and the statement's in my book, Hitler basically said he knew that the Jews weren't a race. He knew they were an ethnicity. Again, you know,
Yeah.
unbelievable.
It's all just built on nonsense and lies. I'm I'm curious. I did want to ask you one thing. It may be in regards that of Hitler and Himmler. Himmler seemed to be this occult figure, very deeply entrenched in occultic beliefs. This is the man who headed up the SS. This is
Yeah,
the man who was in
one and a
charge of.
quarter million people in the SS, 1.25 million, all the death camps, all
Ugh,
run by the second most powerful man in the Third Reich.
that's right. That's this guy, and he was a former pig farmer, if I remember right. Failed pig farmer, I think
He
he
was a chicken farmer,
chicken farmer. Okay,
failed chicken farmer,
failed
yeah.
chicken farmer. There we go.
With a very small head, who didn't look
Yes.
in the least bit Aryan. But
Yeah, that too. And deeply occultic. And so it seems to me from having read what you wrote that he was the sort of true believer of this Aryan race theory based on this Blavatsky concept of, races, which filters through a few other people before it reaches Himmler in this corrupted version where this is the master race responsible for all science, art, culture, etc. And we need to prove that, that we're them. So this is the beginning of this whole thing. But this seems to be Himmler's thing more than Hitler's, even though Hitler's getting a lot of traction on hating and othering very specific groups of people, not just Jews, but Romanians and
Slavs,
disabled people and Slavs and these Eastern European types. He
schizophrenics.
Oh, he's just having a field day getting riling up hate, hate, hate towards those people. But it doesn't seem like Hitler's doing that from a position of occult certainty that we need to bring back the Aryan race. It just feels like that's something he's kind of, yes, 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 that sounds good. Let's run with that. As opposed to something he's a deep believer in. Am I seeing that right? Or how does that, where's Hitler's head in this?
The thing that surprised me the most was, and I've never, and I've done a lot of research. I've never done anything that required so much reading, and thankfully it's a fairly small field, so I was able to read all of the principal texts. Um, what what comes out is that yes, Hitler believed in the Aryan race, but there's no explanation of why. There's no backstory. He's just anti-Semitic, and that's part of the kind of, that's happening everywhere in Europe, and it's been
Mm-hmm.
happening for hundreds of years.
Right.
The Vatican City, for example, it's only, I think, in the 1890s that Jews are allowed into the Vatican City in Rome without having to wear something like the yellow star. So it's a prejudice and a bias. Then you have this bizarre thing that about 100,000 Jews fought on the Axis, the German side, in the First World War. 12,000 of them died. There were many Iron Crosses awarded. There are even pictures of rabbinical ceremonies being held by the German army during that point.
Wow.
Yet, there had to be a scapegoat. There had to be somebody blamed. I think Hitler, who was a man of fairly small wit, he was not an intellectual. I think he genuinely believed in this superior separate race, but he ridiculed Himmler's beliefs in the occult. So
Right.
Himmler spent most of Germany's money, the greatest expense outside of creating the military force, was these expeditions all over the world, Finland, Sweden, Tibet, um, to try and find the Cathars, Indiana Jones, in the Languedoc in the south of France. Huge amounts were spent on archaeological digs. And Hitler ridiculed this. He said, you know, when the Romans were building great monuments, our ancestors were living in mud huts. So those
Right.
are the Aryans. So Hitler has one belief about this. The thing that surprised me the most, and this is not going to be popular, the thing that surprised me the most was the influence of the Christian churches, the Protestant churches. Because while Vatican City had labeled Jews, you know, until very recently, they actually stood up against eugenic programs, the eugenic programs in the US, which of course preceded Germany by 30
Right.
years. Connecticut
That's
was the
right.
first place to have a sterilization law, and the last sterilization law in the US was in the 1980s in Oregon. So, and tens of thousands of people were sterilized under these laws. In Germany, that had come along before Hitler, uh, about 12 years before Hitler comes to power. They've started a eugenics program. In the UK, it was voted down in Parliament, even though we gave the world the word eugenics, good birth. The Parliament would not accept this concept, much as Winston Churchill wanted it before the First World War.
Right.
But finding out that the 28 Protestant confessions in Germany to survive the Third Reich and the 12 years of the Third Reich, all had to say, we believe that Jesus was not Jewish. We believe he was Aryan. And we accept that he came to get rid of Judaism.
Wow.
And the thought that, and then you dig into that, and as you saw in the book, of course, it goes back to Luther and the foundations of the Protestant church. That Luther, and I give the quotation in a quotation from his paper about the Jews, saying they should be hung 7 times higher than other criminals. So you've got this strand, and this is the bit that the modern world probably isn't too keen to look at, that the Christian churches, the Protestant churches, were complicit in the Holocaust.
Sure. Sure.
And so then you've got the bunch of people with Himmler, Heydrich, Hans Frank, who was the governor of Poland and therefore directly over the death camps, Rudolf Hess, the deputy leader of the Nazis. They are all occultists. They are all believers in a Wotanist, or followers of Odin, the chief of the principal god of the Vikings, about whom we actually know very little. It's only the Icelandic Edda that tells us anything, and that's hundreds and hundreds of years after the period of the supposed Aryans. It's it's after 1000 AD. So most of what they believed about Wotan was invented in the few years before the First World War. So after the turn of the century, this stuff is made up by people who are trans mediums, just as Hubbard was. He was somebody who, he talks about it in
Yeah,
Dianetics Evolution of Science. He talks about automatic writing.
that's right.
And there's a wonderful recording of him that anybody who's in Scientology should listen to, called Battle of the Universes, where it's just him and a 19-year-old Mary Sue Whip, who will become Mary Sue Hubbard, just the two of them, not a lecture. And he starts talking like this, and he's channeling something, and he starts talking about the 80 other universes, which we never hear of again,
That's right.
which is shocking and frightening. In the same way, Madame Blavatsky she's a trans medium. She picks up all of this stuff about the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons, the Sufis, various Indian orders, and she really does. She absorbs all of this material from childhood. And unlike Hubbard, she is incredibly well read. She speaks 9 languages. She travels the world. She really was an explorer, unlike Hubbard.
Right.
She didn't have to make those stories up, but she believes all of this stuff that's been channeled by people before her. And so you come to, say, the Rosicrucians, so the Freemasons come out of the Rosicrucians. The earliest we can possibly put the Rosicrucians is somewhere after 1600. Yet they claim to go back to the Emerald Tablet and the Book of Thoth in Egypt.
Right.
And it's kind of not really. They pick up things from Islamic Sufis. They there's all sorts of interrelationship. And whenever somebody sees something that feels right to them, they incorporate that as the truth.
Right.
And so, and then Ron Hubbard checks it on the e-meter. Well, there is a point in there, and it was incredible for me. I knew Captain Bill Robertson. I knew him quite well. Over an 8-month period, he lived in East Grinstead when I was living there, and he kept coming around to try and talk me back into Scientology. And I kept trying to get him to tell me what the two things that he'd seen L. Ron Hubbard do that would put anyone off being in Scientology. He said that to me, and I spent months trying to get him to tell me what he had seen Hubbard do that would put anyone off Scientology, and he wasn't going to tell me. But it meant I spent time with him. And up to my leaving Scientology, I read his sector operations bulletins, these crazy things. But once I'd got to know him and realized he was barking mad, and I liked the guy, but he was completely crazy. Once I'd realized that, I stopped reading what he was writing. So only when writing this book did I read the rest of the sector operations bulletins. And one of them amazed me so much that I reprint it in full in the book. And in this, he finally, there was the answer to all of these people and what they do. He talks about the Chicks Club. I'm not sure how you meant to say that, but what is now called the Gulf of America, the meteorite or asteroid that hit it and that caused, we believe, the Great Extinction, the last Great Extinction, which took the
Talking about the asteroid into the Yucatan Basin.
Is it the Yucatan Basin that it is?
I think that's the region we're talking about.
Yeah.
In Central America, Mexico region.
Oh, I thought it actually hit in the Gulf, but
oh well, I mean, it might have been in the Gulf, but it's in that. I might be mixing historical references here, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong.
No, I think you're probably right.
I think it's the Yucatan region is where the asteroid hit.
Yeah, and the what it gets to is the skies went dark, the dinosaurs froze. They couldn't get light enough to warm their blood to move, and away they go. Great extinction. Now, Hubbard initially, this is what he's thinking about for OT3, operating Thetan Level 3, the wall of fire that he broke through in 1966, 67. That he's remembered. Now, he's read about the Great Extinction, and at that time, the radiocarbon dating hadn't been done. And so it was kind of thought to have maybe been 75 million years ago. Then radiocarbon dating has been repeatedly done, and it's dated at 65 million years. Now, according to Scientology, if you don't get the date right, then the incident won't erase. You'll still be stuck with the trauma of what happened.
That's right.
Captain Bill makes this side reference in this bulletin, Sector Operations Bulletin, SOB, where he says the scientists have got it wrong because Ron checked it on an e-meter. You're like,
yeah,
which is, as you have shown on your show, and I've talked with Jeffrey Augustine at some length about it on my show. The e-meter it's a piece of crap. It's
like crap. That's right.
It measures what you're feeling. If it measures anything at all, it does not measure what the truth is.
It's not even remotely. Not even remotely.
It made me realize that it's this confidence, this certainty that is the feelings of knowing, the thing that William James so adequately describes, noesis, which drives us in the world. That the difference separating our beliefs and fantasies and what we would like to happen from the evidence, which is the reason part of your model, is teaching people to do that, to go, well, I've told the same story. You heard me tell it 10 years ago in Toronto, that when I was 17, a Bible basher told me, I don't understand the Bible, but I know it's all true. How can you know something that you don't understand? But I'm afraid we all live that way,
Well, it was a bit of an epiphanal moment for me to sort of reframe certainty as not a consequence or a result of knowledge, but a moral foundational principle. Yes. Certainty is not based on knowledge. Certainty comes from morality. And that's something that I kind of twigged on when I was putting my model together that was a real like light bulb moment for me. And I hope it can be for other people too, because we do connect certainty with knowledge and we shouldn't. They really don't have, you can have people who know nothing and yet, as you just pointed out, be absolutely sure that they are right. And they cannot present you a single fact or piece of evidence. So it's clearly not based on or founded upon knowledge that we get certainty. It comes out of this other quantity, and that is morality. And so we're segueing right into this. So let's go ahead and do it. Because we were going to talk about my model today, and
Yeah.
this is a perfect way to get into that. The I've dared to put a model together. I feel a little, I don't feel arrogant, but I do feel a little, that I'm doing this. But at the same time, I really feel that I've got a way of thinking about our behavior, people's behavior, human beings across space and time, right? All cultures, all people everywhere. How are they motivated? What makes them do what they do? And I feel like this is a question that deserves an answer. And that is something I've been pursuing for many, many years. I wanted to figure out after getting out of Scientology why I was able to be manipulated the way that I was, why
Of
all of us
course.
were,
Yeah.
you know.
I did that
And
too.
yeah, and we come and people like you and me came out. Not everybody does this, but you and me came out.
Almost nobody does it.
And
Almost nobody reassesses. They just say, I'm done with that. I can just walk away. It has no future influence on me. I
that's
won't
right.
get fooled again. Now,
And
the
they're
guy
so
who wrote
wrong.
the song, I Won't Get Fooled Again, was a disciple of Meher Baba.
Yeah, it's just come on, guys. It's of course we're going to get fooled again because we're silly, and that's a good word to describe human beings if you're being in a
Well,
sort of facetious.
I'll give you a better word. The word is fatuous, which means silly, and we become infatuated.
There we go. There we go. That's great because we are driven by impulses that are not logical. We're built to survive. We are not built to be reasonable or come up with objective truth or objectively true things
And follow our
as
desires,
what
which
we
is
think about, right?
possibly why artificial general intelligence will never be impossible,
It's
because of the complexity of desire that human
that's right.
beings have.
That's right. We are driven by not our intelligence. Intelligence is even Hubbard said it's a servo mechanism, right? I love bringing that little bit of minutia out because hardly anybody remembers that. But
Keep the analyzer whirring.
that's right. That's right. But it really is a sort of a tool for our psychology, you could say, for the way we think about things and the way we perceive and shape and interpret the world. If you want to think about psychology from that's the sense from which I'm talking about it. We are living creatures who are able to process an incredible amount of information in a very short period of time compared to what other creatures on this planet do. And we are able to process and calculate and predict into the future in longer term calculations than other animals on this planet are capable of doing. And that's why we seem to have, that's one of the key reasons I think we have this advantage that we have, right, is longer term thinking and consequential thinking and sequential thinking and stuff like that. And that's all thinking layer stuff. But I realized really over the years, and actually you were probably more key to this or crucial to this than any other person, was challenging, critical thinking. And me glomming onto that was an immediate life raft for me
Yeah.
after falling into the ocean of the ex-cult world and floundering around like, what am I supposed to think? What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to act? How am I supposed to proceed forward? And most importantly, how do I avoid falling into another cult? These were the questions that were of deep concern to me in 2013 when I got out of Scientology. And And thankfully, some rapid Google searching and thinking on this topic led me to Carl Sagan and led me to critical thinking and led me to a way of approaching information that it was just, I just never even thought this way before. When I was in Scientology, I'd been very carefully groomed to not think when it came to logical thinking. Hubbard's data series and logic system is immensely not up to the task of giving you the ability to think logically, right? If anything, the system you're taught in Scientology, the data series, is is concentrated confirmation bias. It's concentrated illogical thinking presented to you as a system of objective reasoning.
Yeah,
So
I did the data series evaluators course, and that was in fact very helpful to me when I left because I lost faith in Hubbard. I was a really doctrinaire believer, and I left Scientology to save Scientology.
yeah,
I was at the center of the independent movement in the UK. And about 3 months in, this wodge of documents collected by Michael Lynn Shannon. And if anybody knows who or where
yeah,
Michael Lynn Shannon is, I would love to shake the guy's hand. Um, it wasn't, as people have suggested, Jerry Armstrong, it was Michael Lynn Shannon's work. I read through this 18-inch stack of documents and went, Hubbard was a liar. And then I started to actually look at the contradictions that I'd missed.
yeah.
Um, Probably the strongest example of it in my work is the paper Never Believe a Hypnotist, where you show him in Dianetics, Modern Science and Mental Health, he's saying hypnotism had nothing to do with Dianetics. And then on another page, he says it all comes out of hypnotism.
That's right.
So
That's right.
realizing these double binds, I presume
Exactly.
the Sagan book was The Demon Haunted World.
It was. That
Yeah.
was that was the Demon Haunted World. That's
Yeah.
right, which remains to this day probably my favorite book, and certainly one that had a bigger impact on changing my life than Dianetics did.
Mm.
That's for sure. It was crucial. It was the most crucial knowledge I needed at a crucial time in my life.
Yeah.
December 2013. I was floundering. I was I had just been disconnected from my entire social network, lost my fiance, lost so many things that were so important to me literally overnight. And so finding answers was important. And I'm glad that I searched and found and looked and came up with what I came up with. And so I identified so closely with it that I glommed onto critical thinking as a life preserver that that sort of carried me for a while and gave me an ability to sort of objectively push away some of the experiences and some of the feelings and see what happened. And then we had things like the Going Clear conference, which you guys put on, which I come
Getting
to. And
clear. Yeah.
Getting Clear conference, that's
Yeah.
right. And then it's, oh my God, look, it was so, again, perfect timing. I'm running into, I met you in person, and all the other people. Jerry was there, and so many other people. And
Yuval Laor,
Yuval,
Christian
that's right,
Furco,
where I
yeah.
met Yuval.
Steve Hassan. It's like, yeah.
That's right. All the crew, right? And
All the
so
videos are on my channel, folks.
that
All free of charge now, 10 years later.
please watch them, folks. And I got to talk a little bit on stage too and do some demos
Mhm.
and stuff. But it was the first real world experience of the ex-Scientology world that I had. It was only online that I'd experienced it up until then, and started making YouTube videos and stuff. But this was real world, and I could interact with people, and we could have discussions and stuff like that, and start kind of diving in more to the real human side of all of this. And that's where, maybe I started having more awareness or more attention on the what I started thinking about as the human side of this, right? Because when I went down the critical thinking rabbit hole of logical fallacies and argumentation and reasoning, I started seeing problems right away, but I couldn't quite figure out what it was that was problematic about what I was seeing. I couldn't think through it yet. It just seemed like people in the critical thinking world or skeptical world were argumentative to a degree that what seemed unnecessary. It just seemed like this was too much, right? And I thought, Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And the other thing that didn't make any damn sense was at the same time that I'm debunking or figuring out the cult stuff, I'm also being confronted with and dealing with flat Earth and 9/11 truthers and Alex Jones. And this kind of stuff is also prominent on YouTube and used to be much more prominent many years ago than it is now. And so it would be the subject of debunking, and people would do videos and they'd, rag on Alex Jones, and they'd do this and that and flat Earth. And I always thought of it as the low-hanging fruit of the critical thinking world because it's so easy to debunk.
And then QAnon came along.
And then that's right. That's exactly right. And here was the thing that really kept hitting me in the face that I couldn't get away from with the critical thinking, which is the flat earthers, the 9/11 truthers, the QAnon folks, to a person, will tell you and will even demonstrate to a degree their good critical thinking skills to show you, lead you down a path of logic to their conclusion of a flat Earth. Lucifer is running the world, NASA's involved in a conglomeration of conspiracies with the aeronautics and space and aeronautics industry where, tens of thousands of people are involved in this conspiracy. And this is the product of critical thinking, quote unquote, right? Air quotes here. So I'm looking at this as, Mr. Critical Thinker, and I'm thinking to myself, there's a flaw in this system. There is something really, really wrong here that people can use this tool set that I believe is our salvation, and yet come up with such grossly wrong answers. How is this possible? And that was something that that you would, you didn't bring this up as such, but you would poke at that critical thinking thing. And I would always be like, he's right, but I'm stuck on this, but I don't know exactly what the problem is. There's something messing with this. And thankfully, at least for how this all came together for me, that same time, I'm diving into still deconstructing Scientology, and I dive into one of the deepest rabbit holes you can get into in Scientology, which is the tone scale. And well, I mean, I'm actually curious, what is your bottom line take on the tone scale? Because you've compared it to the humors and various things as terms of where Hubbard got it from. We had talks about this when I was figuring this out.
Yeah, originally the 0 to 4 tone scale of science of survival that's expanded there is directly from the medieval humors and the idea that there are 4 temperaments. Phlegmatic, saturnine, melancholic, which means black bile, and choleric, which is yellow bile. And the idea is that these are represented by liquids, blood, snot, bile, yellow bile and black bile. Melan means black, melancholia. And so you'll get these 4 temperaments. It's very interesting because early on he lifts some simple ideas, a little bit of Josef Breuer via Freud. That gives us a basis of Dianetics, some hypnosis, some Aleister Crowley, which, is massively influential. It's reframed in Scientology, but which again I get into in the new book a bit more than I have done in the past. But then he takes this idea and he will never let go of an idea. So another example is the idea of the basic engram on a chain or the basic incident, which Freud talked about before the First World War. So around the time that Hubbard was born. So it wasn't a new idea, this idea that if you find the initial trauma, then the rest will all fly away. So he starts out in Dianetics with the unoriginal idea that birth is the primary trauma. Unoriginal because Otto Rank had talked about it in the 30s, and there's even an advert for The Search for the Beloved by Nandor Fodor on the back of the first edition of Dianetics. It published a year before, which is an examination of birth and prenatal trauma. Hubbard then takes it back and says, well, birth didn't make you a superhuman, so it must be something that happened in the womb. Then he gets us back to the sperm dream, a personal favorite of mine, that one of those poor little fellows was dreaming. And then in 1951, June 51, he issues Science of Survival. And as ever, he anything that might make him look fatuous, silly, he will transfer to somebody else. So he says, people are telling me that in their auditing, they are finding past life incidents. Now, the reality was, of course, he'd come out of Crowleyite magic, where the magical memory is fundamental. Also, the term past lives, more usually we talk about reincarnation. Crowley talks about past lives. So he picks that up. But now he says, well, these other people are finding this thing out. The foundation in Wichita, Kansas in early 52 blew up because Hubbard started insisting that there were past lives. Because, of course, the basic wasn't actually producing these clears. In Dianetics, he said he'd used these techniques on 273 people, not one of whom has ever come forward in all these years. And he had cleared these people. And so it did not work. And so rather than going and finding another method, you just keep going earlier. And the universe, in June 52, when he's really got into this, at the beginning of History of Man, not the current Miscavige edition, but in the beginning, it says, this is a cold-blooded and factual account of your last 60 trillion years. Then a bit later on, it says 73 trillion. And by the end of the book, we've got to 76. Miscavige has corrected it to 76 the way through. Now, adding 16 trillion years in a universe that is only 13.8 billion years old, so multiplying that by that much is really quite something. When that doesn't work, I think the biggest estimate I've seen is in the Operating Thetan Section 5 pack, where it says 1.25 quadrillion years. And there may be people out there like me who think that a quadrille is a type of dance, but apparently not. It's so we've gone from billion to trillion to quadrillion years to find this origin. And we haven't even dealt with the other 79 universes.
That's right. So it doesn't, and isn't incident 1 4 quadrillion years?
I thought it was at 1 quadrillion, but I get lost. It could well be. I get lost counting.
What's through quadrillion years among friends?
Between friends, exactly.
That's right.
So once he's set a principle, then that must work, and he will keep coming back. Scientology only has about 12 ideas in it, but they're clothed in such a way. It's like there are 2,000 processors, but when you take them apart, there are only about 10.
Yeah.
And you have running engrams, for example. So and then that becomes straight wire when it's done on things that aren't traumatic. And then you have objective
processes.
Which are hypnotic pacing, of course, as any hypnotist will recognize. Charles Manson was quite big on those. But with the tone scale, once he's got it, he won't let go.
No.
And so you get these.
It was too powerful because emotional manipulation is where it's all at. And I don't know that Hubbard realized that from the get-go, but I think he figured it out.
I think it's difficult. Martin Gardner, who twice critiqued Hubbard in the 50s and again in the 80s, said that it is possible to be both a charlatan and a crank.
Yeah, that's right.
And in Hubbard's case, I think with Blavatsky, she was a crank. Mm-hmm. She believed what she was saying. Hubbard, on the other hand, we know didn't, because there are witnesses to it. People who were aboard the Apollo, the flagship, who overheard in 1971, I think it was, one of the arguments with Mary Sue, where Mary Sue was screaming her head off at Hubbard, saying, "You are a charlatan. This stuff doesn't work." And in the end, Hubbard said, "What do I have to do to prove that it works?" She said, "I've never been exterior." And so Otto Roos, who I interviewed at great length, was detailed to run every exteriorization process in Scientology. And he said, "My God, there are about 90 of them." And after a few weeks, Mary Sue Hubbard said, "I can't take any more."
And she never could. And she never could exteriorize.
And yet, and nor can anyone else. It's a psychiatric condition.
Well, no, I know, but it's funny that she couldn't induce it, whereas, people walking in on a comm course from the sidewalk in the 1970s could. So it really speaks to the variety of experience in Scientology that somebody who is at the very, very, very top, married to the founder, can't let herself go there into that place, which is really interesting because it speaks to the actual effectiveness of the processing that it really isn't a universal catch-all. Some people just aren't going to be hit by this stuff.
And I mean, psychiatrists call it depersonalization. And of course, Susan Blackmore, when she was head of parapsychology at Bristol University, the base of her whole career was to prove out of the body experiences. And she ended up writing an account of it called Beyond the Body, because she smoked dope when she was a student and gone over the rooftops. And so she started looking forensically at these experiences. And she came to the conclusion that she had never interviewed anybody who'd had such a thing, because when you looked at the physical details, the descriptions were always wrong.
Yeah.
The color of the roof tiles was
Which
wrong.
is why Hubbard said, none of that. We're not going to have any of that. Nobody's going to be fact checking anybody's accounts of exteriorization or going. He actually laid that down. He was like, don't do it. If you do it, you're the bad guy, right?
Yeah,
for
we'll say
validating the pre-clears information.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, it's such an operation. But this is where I got to with the emotional layers. Is sort of like basically this model. I mean, like, just to get to the chase, is the idea is that you're operating at three layers of influence on your behavior, right? What is it that determines what you're going to do or how you're going to behave? Well, you have your thinking, your logic, your reasoning, which is often used to rationalize or justify rather than reason.
Intellectualize is the term Freudians use.
There you go. You have an emotional layer, which is really the engine driving this machine. And the emotional layer is operating under the rational layer. It's sort of a subconscious set of processes that we don't think about and are not really aware of too often until we are experiencing an emotional reaction in the moment, which we tend to do 24/7 in one way or another. But that's our surface layer perception of the experience. But emotions go deep and have everything to do with how our brain regulates the systems of our body and how we respond to the external stimuli, you could say, right? The things that we run into in our lives, reactions, and responses to things are what we call emotions. They're thoughts your whole body feels. It happens through your whole body, and it's a feeling, and we all know what that is, even if we have a hard time putting words to it, because we've been feeling 24/7, 365 since the day we were born. We all know what that is. In academia, I found a paper from 1980 or 81 that summarized all the definitions of the word emotion as used in various social science papers up until that point. And this is ancient history. It's 1980. There were 96 definitions of the word emotion. There's a lot of ways people have looked at this concept from a neurological, psychological, sociological, biological level to describe and talk about these feelings we have. But regardless, the thing about my model is it doesn't really matter what definition of emotion you're using. We're really talking about two levels of function. Your emotional responses in the moment, which you don't really have control over, but you can mitigate, what's the word? Discipline yourself to have, some degree of control over them after they're happening. But controlling emotions and suppressing them is generally not a healthy thing for us to be doing. So you have your emotional reactions in the moment, and then you have another layer of emotional activity going on in your noggin. And that has to do with what we call emotional needs. And those are longer term things. And so what I found in looking into emotion when I was trying to debunk and break down the tone scale and figure out what this was all about. Hubbard takes all these emotions and puts them on a scale and numbers them and gives them value and tells you there's good emotions and bad emotions and positive emotions and negative emotions. And there's a negative tone scale with minus emotions that are, you're so bad off, you don't even know how bad off you are. I mean, this is the
like Hubbard, you will spend your life in hiding, which is
Yeah,
-8.
that's right.
And
That's
you've
right.
got things like pain that are thrown in that are not emotions.
That's right.
Sympathy, that's an interesting thought, that's an emotion rather
That's
than
right.
a response to in real time.
That's
Yeah,
right.
because there was a story that Perry Chapdelaine told me. Chapdelaine was around Hubbard in the early 50s. And he said one night, Hubbard said, bring out a bottle of bourbon or maybe two, and we'll sit down and we'll write the axioms of Dianetics. And he said, so we sat there and we got, a little bit happy on this. And Hubbard said, it's got to sound science-y.
Yes, exactly.
Have you ever met a Scientologist who actually read those bloody things and could make any sense of them? The Dianetic axioms. Lambda becomes theta when gamma is delta.
Oh, dude, I have literally taken my 880 or my 880, my 8808 books down to the secular hub where I meet up with engineers and physicists, and I literally know quantum physicists, right? And I take this stuff down to them, and it's just a laugh fest. We just can't stop laughing at Hubbard's scientific prose about electronics and electronic flows. My electrical engineer friends just literally, they just could not stop belly laughing over it. So Hubbard didn't really know what he was talking about, but he did have a way of twisting up emotions and, as you say, even misnaming states of being or responses as emotions so as to nullify or negate them. Sympathy is bad. You can't have any sympathy in Scientology.
Therefore, compassion is bad.
What did he say? If there's nothing else you can do, well, at least you can sympathize with the person, as though it's a bad thing to do to sympathize with somebody.
And it leads to a very dangerous set of behaviors. When I meet parent and child who've been in Scientology, I say to the parent, when the child was hurt, were you silent? Or did you say, there? Did you express? And then you talk to the child. And one of my very positive memories was from being about 4 years old, and Dad had got a new job, and he bought bikes for me and the next brother up, my brother Jamie. And Jamie decided, he'd been about 8, 9, that he would rope the bikes together, and he could. Now I couldn't ride a bike. I came off. I got a really bad graze on my knee, and my grandma was there. My grandma, to this day, is still the only person I've met who was close to being a saint. She was absolutely wonderful, but not necessarily a good thing, because of course she wouldn't say anything horrible about people. So, sometimes you have to, I think. I've come to the decision. But I really, to this day, remember the comfort that I felt from this woman attending to me.
Yeah.
Not being silent, not being, so people showing care and compassion being learned. Here's a rare fact for you. Among insects, and last week I took, earlier this week actually, I talked with Yuval Law, or was it? I think it was Yuval, and he didn't know what an earwig was. Do you know what an earwig is?
Huh?
Yeah, insect. Female earwigs, as far as is known, certainly to me, are the only insects that care for their young. And if you take the mother earwig away, the young won't care for their young. So this is a piece of cultural transmission at this low level. But we're saying that earwigs can do this, but L. Ron Hubbard was perfectly fine with his own son committing suicide.
He was. L. Ron Hubbard was a
No
monster
sympathy.
to his kids.
No sympathy.
None at all. And he built that into, and this is one of the many ways that he built it into the DNA of the organization, right?
Mhm.
Through the scriptures, through the doctrines and the practices.
This
And
is
so when Hubbard-
Nazism. This is Nazism.
Yeah, when Hubbard says sympathy is, the least bottom rung thing you can do for somebody, right? It's almost like he holds it in contempt and passes that on to his members. And so we did. And we would treat people contemptibly when they just needed a helping hand or a shoulder to cry on. This is
You're a
how it would.
degraded being. You're a
Yeah,
downstat.
exactly. Right? So this is how we would emotionally, take in Scientology and then be manipulated by it and manipulate other people with it in really negative ways. And it dawned on me the more I learned about emotion, whether you're following, Paul Ekman's theories on emotion, or whether you're following Lisa Feldman Barrett's theories on constructed emotion, or whatever theory you want to use, the fact of emotions is a very, very real thing in human experience. And beyond emotional reactions are these emotional needs, these longer term drivers of our behavior in different areas of our life. We need community. It is the very rare human being who does not feel a compulsion to be around other people, at least sometimes.
Schizotypal.
You'd have to be pretty outlierish in order to
I
not.
mean, it is a psychiatric classification. There are schizoids and schizotypal people who do not feel the need for other people's company. Of course, in
Right.
the original and proper definition of narcissism, a narcissist is somebody who does not wish to have sex with anybody but themselves. That's what Havelock Ellis first used the term for, and that is correct. Freud then twisted it and
Oh,
said
that's
a
interesting.
person who only loves themselves. Then Eric Fromm came along and said, no, it's a person who doesn't know how to love, which I think is accurate.
I think that's a very
Not
accurate statement.
naming any names in
Yes,
politics at
yes,
the
of
moment.
course. Well, and so outliers, of course, and sort of, the pathologically statistical pathological percentage of our society is not the people I'm trying to talk about or explain with this model. I'm
No, it's the
talking
bell
about,
curve. Yeah.
yeah, the average here, right? And so I'm not looking at trying to explain pathological, emotionally deviant behavior. I'm looking at average human behavior. And your average human being is driven by an emotional core that's made up of various categories of what we call emotional needs. And community is one of them. The feeling or need or compulsion or instinctive drive for security, for personal safety, for, if you find yourself in a dangerous situation, your body is literally going to be telling you, get out, get away, do something different, change this situation. That drive, that impulse is coming from a survival base that I refer to as an emotional need. It drives you, right? It pushes you to behave in certain ways. We have purpose or meaning, and this is something fundamental to human existence. It's an emotional need. We need to have purpose and meaning in our life, all the way to when we're children, when we're sitting in school. Why am I going to learn this, teacher? Why are you teaching me this? This phrase comes out of this need of, what is the purpose of this? Why are you dumping this information on me? Right? This is all very instinctive. Nobody has to teach us our emotional needs. They're there regardless of whether we even know how to talk. It's part of what makes us human.
And
And
they
this,
can also be perverted in the child.
oh,
So
very
that
much.
we have this awful situation where children grow up without proper attachment, with a disorganized
Yes,
attachment,
that's right.
where they are treated badly and have nobody that they can connect to, that there'll be a tendency, it's said about 50%. I know victims of abuse who have survived and become marvelous people, but I also know victims of abuse who have become abusers, and who,
That's right.
some use their victimhood to attack others, but many of them will actually, their emotional need becomes sadistic. It becomes controlling, as it was with Hubbard. And there's no
That's right.
excuse with Hubbard. His childhood, I know Jeffrey Augustine and I have disagreed on this. I see no evidence, and I've studied his background pretty thoroughly. I see no evidence of any abuse in his childhood. He was a
Yeah.
beloved child.
Me too.
And
Yep.
yeah, so even without that, you can have this pathology that develops. I think in Hubbard, as Yuval always said, it was temporal lobe epilepsy.
I
I'm
believe so too.
convinced of that. I'm also convinced that this condition is widespread among cult
Me too.
leaders, political leaders. People have been banged in the head and they're not functioning properly, and they have too much certainty.
Exactly, which is exactly where we're going, because with this sort of engine block of emotional needs that sort of compels behavior in certain areas, you will be driven to get a job or operate in society or navigate social circles or social understandings to the degree that you are, engaged with your emotional needs. You're having what's called a well-adjusted, well-centered, satisfying life. It's not about happiness, but it is about satisfaction, and it is about fulfilling these needs. We might not necessarily be having, peak experience after peak experience because we feel secure, but boy, does it save us a lot of anxiety and stress if we feel secure. So it's a constant balancing act that we are navigating as we navigate our lives to fulfill these various needs that we have, and the
To
individual.
find homeostasis.
I'm sorry.
To find homeostasis.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We're trying to find that balance. And that's where our life satisfaction comes from. The peak experiences are the real, bomb diggity moments for us. Oh wow, that was amazing. You get to bookmark those moments. But life isn't about peak experiences. It's about homeostasis and finding that middle ground where we cannot live lives of quiet, terror, right, as they say. So that's where emotional needs come in. And as you just pointed out, right, attachment for children, this is all part of emotional needs. When these are not being fulfilled, you can end up with pathological, lifelong chronic conditions because of these unfulfilled needs early on. So
I
this
mean,
is
I think of it in the same sense that if a, a baby does not have light for, I can't remember how long it is, but the first 6 months of their life or something, they will be blind because the
ooh,
brain doesn't
ooh,
actually figure how to
right.
do it. And I think it's very much the same if you're brought up in without literacy.
Yes.
That the difficulty, I'm pleased that the tech bros in Silicon Valley are now not letting their kids have computers, because it means that they'll all grow up technologically incompetent, and they'll squander that huge amount of money that they don't deserve to have. They're sending them to Waldorf schools. It's like,
Jesus.
come on, guys, this is business.
It's a
And
bit much.
philosophy. Yeah.
But that's sort of the middle of the model, right? Is this middle layer of emotion. And as I mentioned, I've made various analogies to it, but I think an engine block is a good way of thinking about it in a car, right? You could also think about this in terms of if our rational or rationalization layer is about the words of the song, then the emotional layer is the music. It's the thing driving the song forward, right? And it's not words, it's its own thing. It exists without words. Emotions are not based in words. We struggle to find words to describe how we are feeling, but the feelings are the thing. And that's what's driving our behavior. But there's another layer. And this was the part that really hit hard for me, because you take apart stuff like Scientology's ethics and justice system, which Jefferson Hawkins has probably done more brilliantly than anybody in his book on the justice system of Scientology. He really did some championship work with that.
Yeah.
And
Brilliant
of
guy.
course,
Brilliant
and
guy.
of course, you and I have spoken at length about, the machinations of Hubbard's justice system. Justice is an emotional need. Reciprocity is an emotional need, which is also why it's a point of influence for people, right? Every one of these emotional needs tend to be points that, you could play on, you can press on those buttons, and you can make people do things as a result. They're manipulatable. But there's something even deeper than this. And this is if emotions are the music to a song, this deeper level of morality is the beat.
I'm a
It's
drummer. What can I
yeah,
say?
there you go, right? It's the thing, it's the chassis of the car. It's the thing that provides shape and order and a sense of organization to our lives. It's not just about what rules we subscribe to or what we think of as manners or etiquette or social lubrication. That's all part of morality. We learn it from the very beginnings of our social interactions with people. We're constantly, our brain is like, what's this now? Here's this, here are these other people, other minds exist. This is something we all have to hit on somewhere between 3 and 5 years old. It's called theory of mind, where
Theory
you
of mind.
realize other minds exist. And one also, sometimes wonders whether narcissism might be a little bit of a deficiency in that particular,
Well, it's
experience.
solipsism, yeah.
Yeah,
Solipsism. It's the idea that everything outside of yourself is imaginary and unworthy and
that's
not
right.
worth sympathy.
That's right. Exactly. Right. They don't even exist. They're just NPCs, as Elon Musk likes to say, who I believe, manifest some of this.
No,
So,
you mustn't say things about Elon Musk. He's a lovely man.
of course he is.
Anybody
So,
with 13, 14, or 15 children called X, Y, and Z, you know.
oh my God. Right. Talk about somebody
How
who,
have we come to the point in our civilization where we give power to people like Musk and Peter Thiel? You know, just unbelievable. There's something wrong with our supposed free market capitalism. There
there really
really is.
is. There really is. And this model has a lot to do with explaining why, because this moral layer is really where the powerful manipulation happens, but it's a longer term look, and that's something I really want to stress from the get-go, right? Is you don't drill down to the moral layer very easily or very quickly. This is the sense of a person's order of their life. This is what their shoulds and shouldn'ts, their ought tos and ought not tos. If you sit any human being down, you could get them with enough education or enough, work on it. You could get them to list what are the things you believe fundamentally should be in this world.
The
And
tyranny of the
that's
shoulds.
yeah, exactly. How should people be? How should you be? How ought people act, right? This kind of thing. This is where you're addressing moral foundations, moral values. And we carry around individual moral values and foundations as unique to us as our blueprint, as our DNA or our fingerprints. Everybody is very, very, very individual in this. There's no blanket authority. That's not what this layer is about. This is about your personal psychology. So your moral foundations are yours, and they are based on your experiences from literally day one in this world, interacting with other people as to what's acceptable and unacceptable, and what's going to get you to survive and what's going to not get you to survive. And it's very, very complicated as a landscape. Morals are not just a list of the Ten Commandments. Oh, that's my morality, the Ten Commandment. That's not even remotely close to how complicated this is, because get this.
Well, the
Every
Mosaic Law has
situation,
623 permutations, I think, on the Ten Commandments. So
every different situation you're in, every context you live your life in has a different set of moral values connected with it. You go to work, your behavior, your attitude, your language change compared to when you're at home or with friends or with the club. Every one of these groups has its own moral acceptable and unacceptable, shoulds and shouldn'ts. You get to wear shorts at the bowling alley. You don't get to wear shorts at work, right? These are the ought tos and the shoulds. And so we can break morality down into rules, but psychologically speaking, it's really more better described as your sense of a well-ordered world and all the things that encompasses. So if I say that that's the bottom layer of this model, and below that is literally your core consciousness, your sense of being alive at all, then we realize that the moral layer is right over that sense of self. And it is the closest thing to your identity that I am modeling here, right? These values and ideas are what drive you to act. If you see a child being beaten, it's your moral foundations that are being assaulted. And you immediately feel compelled to act, right? If you're a moral person that way. And this is, so this definitely drives behavior. But when did you learn murder was wrong? Most of us can't remember, right? We've had these ideas so long, we don't even think about them. They're just who we are.
The first layer would be disgust, which comes on between 3 and 6 months in a baby.
Yes, more as to how it's developed. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how the brain mechanism for the feeling of physical disgust is sort of hijacked in us socially to also do double duty at registering social disgust with people, which is why you can get a little bit of a sick feeling in your stomach when you're disgusted by somebody else's behavior. It's absolutely fascinating, the brain chemistry on this. And but the great thing about this model is it doesn't demand any knowledge at all of any brain chemistry. It just simply divides up our behavior into these different points that motivate it. And morality is the deepest layer. It's the strongest, the most powerful layer of our influence, and therefore the hardest to influence. But once you do influence it, you can have a lifelong change in somebody. When I came to believe that L. Ron Hubbard and then David Miscavige by extension were the personification of Scientology and therefore the most important people in the world, my moral foundations were set that I would take a bullet for Miscavige. I would have died for that man, so that he could continue the important work of carrying on the greatest good for the greatest number. It's all built on that moral platform, that an assumption that Scientology is the most moral thing in the world. We are the most ethical people in the universe, right? According to Hubbard. I bought into that. And when you buy into something that powerful, when it gets all the way down to that layer, which takes time and repetition, you're a true believer. You become a true believer, and you gain what is called certainty. And certainty means you don't have to think. You don't have to engage the rational layer. You don't even have to necessarily engage the emotional layer that much. You are righteous. You're always right because of the beliefs and morals that you hold. You come to believe this. And this is whether it's Bible-based, Quran-based, Nexium-based, ego-based, however it is coming, when that moral certainty hits, atrocities are then possible. And so that's sort of how the layers of the model kind of are structured, and the levels of influence that exist in the model. And so the idea is that it shows how information and emotions and our sense of right and wrong are manipulated and coaxed over time to twist up to become in compliance or conformity with what the cult leaders' moral foundations and moral principles are. This is that whole cult, pre-cult personality thing. When we talk about the cult personality, we're talking about the collection of changes and manipulations that happen in these layers that make you into a different person, a different version of yourself. And when you come out of the cult, this same model can be applied to take it apart. You can look back at the emotions and what needs were driving me, what moral foundations. Why did I think it was the greatest good to stalk and harass these people? Why did I actually
Me especially. 16 bloody years of it.
So that's it. That's how it works.
Yep, it's great. We're born into a culture, and people may notice that the first part of that word is cult. And Margaret Singer, Cults in Our Midst, still a vital text, I think,
I
written with
agree.
Yanya Lalich.
Yep.
I think she says in the book, but in conversation, she said to me, it's because there are only cults. There isn't anything else. That we've got these interlocking cults. And when
Yep.
we look to, people have got very weird about the word cult and what it means. I'm
Yep.
still willing to use the dictionary definition,
Me too.
which is a group that is devoted to a teaching or a
Yep.
leader.
Yep.
Came into according to the Oxford English Dictionary, that usage came in the earliest known one is 1711. And so it's been with us for quite a while. Then there started to be this shift. The American Heritage Dictionary in the 1890s started to add a pejorative idea
Yeah,
to it.
that's
But
right.
to say the cult of Christianity is perfectly correct. It's not negative.
Yeah.
The knitting cult lady, when she was going after Steve Hassan, and she's brilliant. She's so entertaining. Was saying, this is not the Deadheads are not a cult. They are fans. And I'm going, let me expand that last word for you. The Deadheads are not a cult, they are fanatics.
I love pointing this out to people. It's the wordplay is so fun.
Yeah, and we get into that. So you're born into a culture.
That's right.
You when you wake up, you're already swimming in the river, as the old texts say. So
Yeah.
around about 5, you become conscious. You start forming memories, and you know there's a bit more going on, but you're already swimming in the river. The river is the culture you were born into, and the
Mhm.
morality. The morality is quite often when Conderonk, the Huron, came to Europe and gave us the Enlightenment. It starts with this one guy, and one of the things that he was bothered about when he met Europeans was they didn't love anybody, and he was like, "We love everybody who's a Huron." Anybody who is a part of our tribal people, we love, but we will torture people from any other culture. And
Right.
that's an interesting differentiation. The Cherokee had it, the
Yeah.
Algonquin had it, the Iroquois, all of the Eastern Seaboard people, perhaps not the Seminole, I'm not sure. But this idea, and they looked at Europeans and said, you smell because you don't wash, you sleep in your armor, you're disgusting, and you don't love each other. You've created a culture of destruction. And so the Enlightenment is born. Rousseau gets hold of this idea, Diderot, Voltaire, what have you. And the culture starts to develop in this other way. So Gonderonk and Graeber and Wengrow, The Dawn of Everything, I think the book is called, is a must read. It changes all of our presumptions about how our culture develops. Really, absolutely. This week I I wrote a complaining letter to New Scientist, as I often do, because somebody had reviewed this book by a neuroscientist, and the neuroscientist said that war is wired into us. It's wired in. We can't help it. I'm kind of going, and we've talked about this before, the Indus Valley civilization lived for 700 years, that's 21 generations, without fighting war.
Right.
So, and we aren't wired, by the way. There are no wires. A
No.
neuroscientist should know this.
And
And
they
so,
should. It's a bad misnomer that phrasing still exists.
yeah, the networks of neurons are so much more beautiful and complex than that. So
That's right.
you're born into a culture. For me, I was born into an Anglican Christian family, so a fairly moderate Christian family. I stopped going to church when I was 11. I stopped believing in God when I was 13, or the God I was being taught about, because it seemed really kind of weird, punitive and unpleasant. And I wouldn't worship anything that wanted to be worshipped. Come on, you know, what's that about? I prefer in Islam, you have this sense that God creates man to share his beauty. I like that. That's much more fun
Me
rather
too.
than, you know,
I'm much more down with that. Yeah.
to write this book, coming back to who are the Markabians, and Yuval says this is like the word Merkaba. And I'm like, what on earth is that? And it's like, that's what precedes Kabbalah of Jewish mysticism. It's the lessons that you go through to journey to heaven in the Merkabah, the chariot, to see the throne of God. And for the first 1,000 years of the Christian era, that was the mysticism at the edge of Judaism. And this whole kind of becoming caught up in this path towards salvation, you're born into a culture. The culture is a set of beliefs that are, when there's thunder, it's because the god Thor, commonly known as Thor, now that we mispronounce our Scandinavian, the god Thor is banging his hammer. That's what's happening. Everybody knows that.
That's
So
right.
I went through Anglican Christianity. I left that at about 13, and I didn't know where I was. When I was 17, I read Lao Tzu, which has stayed with me ever since. And then I became interested in Buddhism. I was part of a Soto Zen Buddhist sect. I learned Zazen meditation in a monastery. I lasted 3 days. I'd intended to be there for 6 months, but it blew my mind. The experience I had was so profound, and I am so glad that I left because it's a cult. Sorry, people. All of the Japanese Zen sects have now apologized for their part in training the Japanese military from the start of the Meiji era through the enslavement of the Koreans in 1910,
Wow.
and through all of the army and navy and air force of the Japanese imperial force did Zazen meditation, or what we call mindfulness, every day. It does
Hmm.
not lead to compassion. It does not lead to salvation. Mindfulness is one of the 8 parts of the Buddhist path. And you cannot separate it out and say, oh, you'll be fine if you just meditate.
Oh
So,
no, that would be kind of similar to the mistake I was sort of owning up to in this with the critical thinking. Without context, it's
you
just a
need
tool, and mindfulness or critical thinking can be used for good or bad. It's a tool.
you
It's a
need right
thing you
thinking.
can do, but the context is what brings value.
Hmm. I
Yeah.
went from, so yeah, right thinking, right action, all of the Eightfold Path, all good fun. Until, of course, you come to this point where you go, I don't believe in reincarnation. So what's the point of enlightenment? You know, I am I am all for work rather than grace, as to
Right.
the division between the Catholic and Protestant Church. The Catholics believe that you work to get to heaven. The Protestants believe your name is in the book of life or not. You're going to go there or not, you know. So
Mm.
very difficult stuff. I went through that, then I got into Scientology in 9 years. I absolutely believed in it. I left. And then this wonderful thing happened. Because I'd left, I was not only undoing Scientology and what it had done, I was realizing that I could create, in your terms, my own morality, my own way of looking at the world. And since then, I've never felt the need to join any organization or society or cult. And I have maintained that exploration, going past the point, about 12 years ago, where I stopped believing in enlightenment. I stopped believing in that. And I went, all that matters in human life to me is relationship. That I should be a decent person. I should do what good I can. But I have the empathy disorder,
Mm.
and it is a disorder.
Mm.
It's a knee-jerk thing, as Paul Bloom at Yale said. Um, Rational compassion is better than empathy, where rather than doing something, anybody could come to me and I would do my best to help them. And it screwed my whole adult life up,
Right.
helping wounded Scientologists who are,
Right.
I'm sad to say, extraordinarily ungrateful. Um, they just, oh, fine, thank you so much, and off they go.
Yeah.
And that's fine. That's fine because it led me to a place where I'm not dependent upon that. I am a fairly happy, contented human being at age 70 as a consequence. But that privilege of being allowed to say, I question everything. And I did an intervention with Hannah and Jerry Whitfield. I did 2 of them, and learned how I wanted to do it, which was not how they did it. And But at the end of the first intervention, it had been so freaky. We had 7 carloads of Scientologists. We had a private investigator flown in from Las Vegas. they were all over us, and we had to do an intervention, which we did for 4 days without, they knew where we were, but they never managed to find out where the person we were seeing was. And it was awful. I got 3 hours sleep a night for a week. I was all over the place. And when I got home, I was really freaked out. This was 1991. I was completely, utterly freaked out. We'd got this young man out of Scientology, which was great. And he's doing well, as far as I know, last I heard from him, which was a year or so back. But it had really messed with me. And I suddenly came up against the unquestionable assumption that I had that was part of the culture I was born into. And that was this, the idea that you should love your neighbor as yourself. Principle put forward by Jesus.
Yeah.
And that was so foundational to my being that when I questioned it, I shook. It took me 3 days to go, I can't think about this. Of course it's true. Of course it's true. I must love everybody. I must do the most I can for everybody around me. And I will therefore always feel failure. I will never feel that I'm doing enough.
Right.
And after 3 days, I went, I have a new principle here. We're going to the Hippocratic Oath. I am not going to harm anybody if I can help. But that's as much as you get. I don't love you anymore.
There you go. There you go. Well,
But
that's exactly what we're talking about at that moral layer.
yeah,
That's exactly what we're talking about. And I don't have the point of view, just the only thing I'll push back lightly on there is, our morals are not established only by us because we work in coordination and relationship with other people. So
of course.
obviously there is some degree of give and take and push and pull with this. But that being said, what you just laid out and what I'm suggesting in talking about this model is that we can actually know about, analyze, think hard on, and really make informed and powerful decisions for ourselves as to what our morality is. But first, we have to recognize that that even exists within us, and that that is something that we can be aware of and can do something about, or conversely, other people can do something about to us if we're not careful and knowledgeable about this subject. And this has to do with emotions and morality. Those two layers. I have had people, I've presented this, I've talked about this for months now, and I've had people coming back to me, I didn't even know I had emotional needs. Emotional needs? What are those? I don't have those. That's something you've got. I mean, it's stunning. It's almost like hearing people say they don't eat. You're like, what are you talking about?
Breatharians.
Yeah, come on, right? Like this just doesn't, that's just not possible that you don't have them. But there are a ton of people out there who have no awareness of it. And because they don't know, they're prey. They become prey because people who do know about them, predators, who spend their life studying it, even if they don't put it in these words, this is what they study: emotional reactions, emotional needs, and morality. This is what these predators are students of. And this is the piano they play when they play us.
Cognitive empathy, as the psychologists call it.
Yeah, that's right.
The ability of the psychopath and the predator to read our emotions and act upon them,
that's
where
right.
you then have effective empathy, which is what we feel. I mean, as you know, in Opening Our Minds, one of the central thesis of the book is the human predator. And to put aside the idea of psychopath, sociopath, narcissist, Machiavellian, dark triad, all of these things, and say, well, those are diagnostic things, and that's all very interesting. However, how am I going to be safe in the world? What can I teach to children so that they can recognize that another person is trying to sell them something?
That's right. That's right.
We do, sadly, live in a world which has always been run by predators. And we don't need to live in such a world. We are at, a crucial point in humanity at the moment. Things are going badly wrong.
Yep.
With genocide and with just the horrors. I mean, the thought that the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda have settled their stuff. There are still 200 militias fighting in that ground. It's a nonsense that that war has been settled, and it's been going on for decades at the loss of hundreds of thousands of lives. These things are happening in our world. We, I profoundly believe, have the tools to change that.
That's right.
But a major part of that is becoming self-aware in the sense of saying, yes, my morality is my business. It is up to me to decide how I feel, what I'm going to do about this.
That's right.
And to make of my life something that is useful without flying into self-sacrifice, which is
or martyrdom, exactly,
Yeah.
which, as you mentioned, is its own form of pathology, right? I've got it too. We will work ourselves to death for other people. It's imperative that we become more self-aware, in order to meet the challenges of what we're running into in the world now. We've got to
do not surrender to predators. Do not surrender to predators, which is what has happened. Even our democratic system, as Lord Hailsham, who was a right-wing British politician, said, we live in an elective dictatorship. We elect the dictators for the next 4, in this country, 5 years. And we have to find a different balance. We have to look at the super rich who are preying upon us. You know, I'm having a conversation with one of my dearest friends the other day, and he put up the point of view, you were talking about what happens when AI takes over in the next 2 to 5 years. Who will it kill first? And his point of view is it will kill all the people on welfare. And I was, no, AI is way smarter than that. It's going to look at who's doing the most damage. It's going to kill the billies. It's going to take all of the billies, the billy club, as I like to think of them, and wipe them out. If there is logic, it's going to take out the lawyers, the accountants, the politicians.
Wow.
You know, it's going to, because to run a society that is non-damaging to the environment and that is sustaining for human beings, the people at the top, some of them are good people, but many of them are not. And their own advancement is what's become important. So that part of our morality that says, I will surrender to the will of, that's something we need to be rid of. And it doesn't mean rebelling against everything or trying to destroy anything. In fact, quite the opposite. I went off Marxism when I was 15 and I didn't know anything about it. And the first quote I heard from Marx was, there's no such thing as a bloodless revolution. And I went, I'm not having anything to do with that.
Right.
There's got to be a way of changing people's minds so that we can, you know, achieve something. And as you say, through reason, emotion, morality, we have, you know, an approach. There's a good tool, good set of tools.
That's right. And that's the whole effort here, folks, is, you know, if you're going to understand, if you want to change people, you got to understand what drives them. And once we understand it, and at least enough to a degree that we can start addressing these layers instead of talking at each other and past each other with just the noise of the rationalization layer, yapping at one another. That's kind of our spokesperson, is our rationalization layer. But often, I hope I'm pointing out, or I hope it's kind of visible now, that that layer isn't what's really going on. Those words aren't that important. When you're seeing another human being screaming and yelling and quite emotionally invested in a thing, it's not a guess that it's the emotions driving that, and the words really don't matter that much. This is why you don't have to really listen. I mean, you know, this is very, very dangerous advice, but you know, listening to angry people is generally not a good idea, because the things they're saying aren't the problem. It's the emotions and the moral outrage beneath those emotions that you really want to get down to. And if you engage with just the surface layer stuff, you're wasting your time and theirs. And that's one of the many lessons that this model can teach us, if we can start using it in our lives to address what's really going on when you're looking at other people and when you're thinking about yourself. We are bundles of emotional needs driven by ought tos and shoulds, and that's what compels us to do so much of what we do. So if we're not happy with what we're doing or not happy with the consequences of what other people are doing, let's look to those layers of behavior and let's change things for real and stop dealing with all this surface level crap. I think that's for me the theme of this of what I'm trying to put out there with this. And I hope that, after, I guess it's been 12 years now of just studying people and myself daily, this is what I've come up with, but I think it's something better than nothing, and I hope it's useful to people. So John,
Yeah, I'm sure it will be.
thanks for talking to me about this and giving me your feedback on it. I appreciate it.
Of course, always a pleasure, Chris.
Awesome. All right. Well, obviously, we're going to wrap up now, folks. So thanks very much for being part of the show here with us. And again, John, thanks for coming on with me. I really do need to pimp John's work here, as we always do, because it's just such good stuff. Check out his book. It's on Amazon. I did review it. You need to read it. You need to review it. And while you're doing so, you could plumbing the depths of the Nazi Party and Scientology. You can think and see, I think, an awful lot of the REM model in activation there. So, folks out there, thanks for coming around. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.